Sometimes when I think about the story of Solomon, I always wondered what exactly was his problem. How is it that he sounded very certain about life when he was writing the book of Proverbs, but when he proceeded in the later years of his life, in the book of Ecclesiastes and the rest, he began to sound uncertain? What was the problem? Was the problem that he had so much money and did not know what to do with it? So I began to wonder, is it that too much wealth is not good? It's really very confusing until I began to truly study and research, and I saw what the problem was. The problem with Solomon was not the amount of wealth he had. The problem with Solomon was his dependency on the wisdom God gifted him with. And this wisdom, for a long period of time, he used it as he was led by God. So when you read the book of Proverbs, you see a lot of godly wisdom in that book. You would see that this is a man that had a relationship with God, a man that was focused on pleasing God, a man that ensured everybody around him did the right thing. And so his wisdom was used in such a manner. But as he got older, Solomon began to rely more on his wisdom than on the leadership of God. And this played out in how he married so many wives from different nations. God explicitly warned Israelites not to marry from foreign nations. It was a godly law that every Israelite was aware of. But Solomon, in his wisdom, felt it was more advantageous to be diplomatic than obedient. What did he do? He knew one of the ways that he could sustain the peace, a peace that was the product of God's power through his father King David. And so the Bible teaches us that, can you finish in the flesh what you began in the spirit? Solomon felt that to keep peace, he needed to marry from each of these neighboring nations. That way they will not fight him. So he married from Egypt, he married from Sidon, he married from Ammon, he married from Moab, he married from all these pagan nations. And when they came into his kingdom, they came with their culture and their religion. That was where his problem started. He began to listen more to his wisdom than the ordinances of God. Even when God warned explicitly in the book of Deuteronomy 17 verse 17 that if you marry multiple wives, they will turn your heart away from God, Solomon in his heart felt he was very wise and such could not happen to him. So he began to depend on his wisdom and not the ordinances of God. And as time played out, these wives began to distract and turn his heart away from God. And so before Solomon knew it, the distance between his heart and the heart of God grew much. And over time, God's presence left the temple because they began to even sacrifice to other gods within the temple. So God's presence left the temple. And once God's presence leaves like that in the Old Testament, he becomes silent. So Solomon had no access to the voice of God. And when God becomes silent or he leaves you, there will be a void in your heart. So Solomon came to a point in his old age where everything he had no longer had meaning. That's why in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 2, Solomon will say, vanity upon vanity is vanity. It wasn't so in the beginning, but because God left the picture, everything that once served God became useless. It became vanity. He had so much of everything he wanted, but lacked everything he needed. And that is God's presence. So Solomon became frustrated. He became depressed. And this is why when you now proceed into reading the book of Ecclesiastes from Proverbs, you will see a different, uncertain Solomon there. Solomon was writing about life as if life is useless. There is nothing meaningful in this life. There's no point being born. There's no point even after solving people's problem. Solomon came to a point of vanity because when God leaves the picture, everything that he has given us, even the gifts, would hold no value. This is what happens when we focus so much on what we are building instead of who we are serving. When this is the case, all that God has given us will become the idol that will silence his voice in our lives, and it's not a good place to be in.